Oil painting is one of the oldest art mediums, but it has some cons, including the use of toxic solvents, hazardous for the artist and the environment. Acrylic paints were invented in the 1930s as a water-based intermediary between oils and watercolor, with the rich colors of oils, but without the need for toxic solvents. They do dry very fast compared to oils, and in the 1990s, water-mixable oil paints were developed. They're still oil-based, but include an emulsifier to make them water-soluble. And their properties are something between acrylics and traditional oils. So how do water-mixable oils compare to acrylics? I've used acrylics for longer, and water-mixable oils have been more of an occasional medium for me, because they felt like more of a hassle, but they are a more forgiving medium because of the longer drying time. While acrylics are easier to use than traditional oils in many ways, they do tend to dry too fast, which makes, for example, soft blending difficult. Oil paints can stay wet for days, meaning you can come back to the painting the next day and still be able to blend the paints on the canvas. For acrylics, this time window is usually a question of minutes, not days or even hours. Some sources claim water-mixable oils do dry faster than traditional oils, but it seems to be more of a question of paint brand or what type of oil was used than a universal truth. Linseed oil dries faster than walnut oil, for example. There are ways to manipulate the drying time of both though. You can make acrylics dry slower by using a slow-drying medium or retarder. You can also add drying agents to oil paints to make them dry faster. Thin layers dry faster and thick layers stay wet longer. Painting in a cold and humid environment will make paint dry slower, and a warm and dry environment will make it dry faster. Oil paints will also stay wet on the palette for longer, so you can cover the palette with plastic wrap, for example, and continue using the same paint mixes for days. The same is not true for acrylics, but there are ways to make them stay wet for longer, like keeping the leftover paint mixes in closed containers, or keeping the palette inside a plastic bag and storing them in the fridge, or using a wet palette. Both paintings can be sealed by varnishing. You can't use acrylic varnishes for oil paintings, but the opposite might work. You can use some oil painting varnishes for acrylic paintings. The Camlin Canva varnish I bought for my oil paintings can be used for oil, alkyd and acrylic paintings. Now, Canva is more expensive than the acrylic varnishes I've had though, so I won't be using it for acrylic paintings as the first choice. It does have an advantage compared to some other oil paint varnishes in that you can varnish the painting even before it's fully dry. You can dilute both acrylics and water-mixable oils with water and don't necessarily need anything else as a solvent. With water-mixable oils, you can also use oil, such as water-mixable linseed oil. You do need to follow the fat over lean rule though, making sure the next layer of paint doesn't contain less oil than the previous layer. You also shouldn't add too much water to the point that the paints become essentially watercolor, because there is a risk the paints might crack as they dry. If you want to do glazing, meaning thin, translucent paint layers, you should add something else besides just water. With oils you can add more oil, and with acrylics you can add some type of medium, like matte medium. Or use more transparent paints to begin with, because there are transparent and opaque acrylic paints. You can use both acrylics and oils on multiple different surfaces, but it is recommended to paint on primed surfaces. Store-bought canvases are usually pre-primed, so you don't need to do anything with them. But if you paint on things like cardboard scraps, clay, untreated wood, plastic or even watercolor paper, you might want to prime it with gesso first. It helps the paint stick to the surface and adhere to it better over time and makes the painting process go smoother. Painting on unprimed cardboard, for example, makes the paint soak into the cardboard. With oil paints, the result even looks quite different when the oil soaks in and the painting is left looking kind of chalky or matte instead of glossy. If you're just doing a practice painting, don't care how long the painting survives, and the paint seems to stick to the surface, you could forget about the surface prep. If you want to combine acrylics and oil paints into one painting, you can paint a base layer or underpainting with acrylics and paint oils on top of that, since acrylics dry faster. If you paint acrylics on top of wet oil paint, the acrylics dry faster and contract as they dry, and the paint layer might crack. With water mixable oils, however, some brands claim you can mix in some acrylic paint with them. Some brands don't recommend it because long-term effects are unknown, and some don't even mention the possibility. If it's an old oil painting though, and you're sure it's completely dry, painting acrylics over it should be okay. But you might need to prep it again to give acrylics something to stick to. There is also a difference between touch dry and being fully dry. Oil painting can be touch dry in days, but it might take weeks or months for it to fully dry. I can't compare water mixable oil paints to traditional oils because I haven't tried them yet. I do have an unopened paint set waiting that I got as a present, and I have some of my grandmother's old paints that must be over 20 years old, but I'm kind of intimidated to try them. But once my white paint tube runs out, I might have to. It is possible to mix traditional oils with the water mixable ones, but you can only add about 20 to 30% of traditional oil to still keep the water solubility. So maybe that's how I'll incorporate them eventually to extend the paints that are running out. Acrylics are often perceived to be safer to paint with than oils, but are they really? And does it apply to water mixable oil paints too? If you're looking for a painting medium that doesn't give off any toxic fumes and possibly cause you headaches, I don't think it's a question between acrylics and water mixable oils. I have noticed there's a difference in smell between different acrylic paint brands. Some definitely smell more than others, but acrylics can give off toxic fumes as they dry the same way as water mixable oils or traditional oils. Even if the packaging claims the paints are non-toxic, it's not necessarily true. They could still be emitting formaldehyde, benzene and more. So either you deal with ventilation or you can go for watercolor or other safer mediums instead. Acrylics are certainly less toxic than traditional oils because you don't need to deal with turpentine or other paint thinners, but they are more toxic than watercolor. And no, you should not be pouring acrylic paint water down the drain either. I used to do that and thought it was completely fine. But it seems acrylics and water mixable oil paints can be pretty close to the same level in terms of toxicity and polluting. It's also best to avoid skin contact with both of them. So if you feel like it's likely you'll get paint on your skin, it's best to wear gloves. And obviously you can get paint on your clothes too. So you should wear clothes you're okay with ruining or wear a painting apron or something. I do have little specks of dried acrylic paint on some of my clothes and it does not come out in the regular wash. I once poured acrylic paint on my carpet and I got it out by cleaning it fast with dish soap and water before the paint dried. Oil paint stains you can try cleaning with oil or oil paint solvents. Theoretically, brush cleanup is the same for acrylics and water mixable oils. Wipe the excess paint onto a paper towel or painting rag, then you can wash them with soap and water. In practice, I've noticed the brushes are harder to clean after water mixable oil painting, so I've added some steps to the cleaning. I now clean them in a liquid of pine soap and water during painting and swirl them in there when I want to clean the brush to use it for a different color. After painting and cleaning them in the pine soap, I pour some vegetable cooking oil on a lid and clean the paint remnants from the brushes on that. Wipe on a paper towel and then rinse once more in dish soap and water. This should work for traditional oils as well, so you don't necessarily need turpentine for the cleanup. I will say that adding things like matte medium to acrylic paint does make the paint brushes harder to clean. And the same goes for acrylic varnish. Like or hype this video if you found it useful, but how do you safely dispose of the brush cleaning water? What's this video next? See you there. Thanks for watching.